How much does Lila's stationery store make in a month? He asked, looking for a reaction from me or my husband. I instinctively knew I shouldn't answer honestly. I spoke, trying to keep my nerves in check. About $2,000, I guess. It's a small shop, so it's tough to keep it going. I intentionally quoted a much lower sales figure. The shop has been around for a while, and being a small local business, it probably doesn't look like it makes much. I cautiously looked at my husband, fearing he might think I'm lying, but he didn't seem suspicious at all. After a silence, he suddenly said, "If it's not making much, it wouldn't matter if it closed, right?" I couldn't believe my ears at his nonchalant words. I stood up abruptly and glared at him. "This shop is something Dad always cherished. I won't close it until the last customer stops coming." My name is Lila. I joined the stationery company right after graduation, but now I've left to run my father's stationery shop. I met my husband Jim through a friend in college, and we married right after graduating, with encouragement from our friends. A big reason for our early marriage was probably my in-laws. They ran a company with my father-in-law, Ben, as the president, and my mother-in-law, Kate, as the vice president. Jim has been on the board since college and is expected to take over from Ben. Having achieved wealth and prestige, what my in-laws wanted next was a grandchild to be their heir. They were eager to get Jim married and have a grandson as soon as possible. Their enthusiasm was intense, partly because Jim was their only child. It seemed more than ensuring the company's survival than simply wanting to see their grandchild. Naturally, Jim, pushed by his parents, married early and urged me to have children while young. But children are a blessing that cannot be forced. If wishing made it so, no one would struggle. Unfortunately, I had difficulty conceiving. In the early years of our marriage, I was still working at the stationery company, so we tried, but without success. Then, as my father passed away and I took over the shop, the idea of starting a family became secondary, and a gap grew between us. "Lila, could you take some time off from the shop and spend it with Jim?" Kate asked, with an innocent smile, sipping her coffee. I could tell she meant I should hurry up and have a child, but I pretended not to notice. "Ben and I are looking forward to seeing our grandchild, preferably a boy if possible." "I'm sorry, I'm trying my best." I gave a non-committal answer, dodging Kate's pressing. Isn't it because Lila isn't trying hard enough?" Kate said this lightly, laughing, and it gave me a headache. I wondered if she too was pressured to have a son in her youth. This thought brought a slight sympathy, but it was no excuse to blame me. Right now, I'm too busy keeping my father's shop afloat to even think about children. I've conveyed this through Jim to my in-laws, but they don't seem to understand. Thankfully, Jim somewhat understands my work. Perhaps he thinks I'll leave him if he doesn't, but I'm grateful I can focus on my job without him nagging about children. One day, at the end of the month, after closing the shop, I was looking at the accounts on my computer at home. The business isn't doing badly, but I need to review the accounts every month to avoid wastefulness if I want to keep the shop running. I noticed Jim watching me from across the computer. He didn't speak or leave, and his presence was distracting. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and spoke to him. "Is there something you need?" Seemingly caught off guard, Jim recoiled slightly. "No, how much does the stationery store you took over from Dad make in a month?" My husband asked, watching my reaction. I looked at the ledger, tracing the numbers in the sales column. Then I looked at my husband, waiting for my reply. "Why do you want to know that?" I asked, driven by some instinct. Until now, my husband had verbally acknowledged my work, but never showed any real interest in the details. If I ever talked about the stationery shop at home, he would just leave the room. So I eventually stopped discussing it with him. This sudden inquiry about sales must mean something. He shifted his gaze around, struggling to speak. Dad told me to ask. After saying just that, he fell silent, as if he had completed a task. I hesitated even more to tell him the actual sales figures. It seemed odd to me that it was Ben, not my husband, who was interested in my shop's sales. I instinctively knew I shouldn't answer honestly. I tried to calm my nerves and then spoke. Maybe about $2,000? It's a small shop, so running it is tough. I deliberately mentioned a much lower sales figure. The shop has been around for a while, and being a small local business, it probably doesn't seem like it makes much. I looked fearfully at my husband, wondering if he'd think I was lying, but he showed no signs of suspicion. After a while of silence, he suddenly said, "If it's not making much, wouldn't it be okay to close it?" His words were so casual, as if it didn't matter at all. I was taken aback and stood up, glaring at him. This store is something Dad always cared about deeply. I won't close it until there's not a single customer left. My husband seemed a bit surprised by my outburst, but stood his ground. Maintaining such an old shop must be a loss, right? Instead of a job that barely makes any money, you should focus on having a child and devote yourself to parenting. Our views clashed head on. Me wanting to protect and work in the shop my father kept going, and my husband wanting me to have a child and stay at home. It's not that I haven't tried to have a child. I've done everything one might call fertility treatment, and my husband has been supportive regarding children. We went to the hospital, but there were no issues with either of us. At this point, I feel like I can only leave it up to fate. But it seems my husband thinks differently. He acts as if closing the shop would miraculously make having a child possible. I clenched my fist, trying to calm myself, and sat back down. Did Ben tell you to say that? My husband tilted his head at my words. Did Ben tell you to get me to close the shop and hurry up with showing him a grandchild? Contrary to my anger, my husband's face remained emotionless. He briefly said, "Not exactly," denying my assumption. If Ben didn't say it, does that mean it's my husband's true feelings? Does he see me just as someone to bear children, like his parents? The thought made me feel like bursting into tears. My husband briefly showed surprise at the tears in my eyes, but quickly composed himself. His face bore a hint of mockery. "Lila, you've changed since taking over the store." I stared at my husband, unable to grasp what he was trying to say. "When you were at the company, you took good care of me, and you were beautiful and cute. Now it's like you care more about the shop than me. Just a nagging middle-aged woman." His disdainful gaze felt like a stab. "I am an adult. I can take care of myself," I shouted, speaking my mind. I am not my husband's mother or a servant, nor am I here solely to bear his children. I have my own life and purpose as an individual. Marriage and parenting are parts of my life, not the main theme. But my feelings don't seem to reach my husband. He frowned in displeasure, and while reaching for the living room door said, "See, that's what I mean. You used to be kinder before running the shop." With that, he left the room, leaving me alone. A sense of emptiness from not understanding my husband and anger at being insulted about my shop filled me. He verbally supported me, but in reality looked down on me for taking over the shop. I wondered if there would have been no conflict with my husband or in-laws if I had a child right after marriage. But if I had a child, I would have been too busy with parenting to decide to take over my father's shop. I remember my father, repeatedly hospitalized, yet still standing in the shop. Maybe I've chosen the wrong path. but it's too late to turn back now. My feelings for my husband have cooled, and I can't bring myself to want a child anymore. Plus, Ben's interest in the shop's earnings is troubling. I closed the laptop and sighed deeply. 2 weeks had passed since that day, but the tense atmosphere with my husband continued. There were no apologies from him, and I kept avoiding conversations. Eventually, I realized that his presence or absence made no difference in my life. The husband I once loved so much now just seemed like a nuisance, interfering with my work. For him, as long as I did the house chores like cooking and laundry, everything else didn't matter. Today, like any other day, I opened the shop. The new school term was about to start. It's a busy time with customers buying necessary school supplies. I was cleaning the shop before opening when a luxury car pulled up. A black car, out of place in our small local shopping street, stopped, and the driver got out and opened the rear door. The two people who stepped out were the last people I wanted to see.
"It's been a while, Lila. Are you keeping well?"
Ben spoke in a relaxed tone, adjusting his suit collar. I held the broom tightly, alternating my gaze between Ben and Kate. Both were dressed in expensive-looking suits, probably custom-made. I remember Ben boasting about his foreign-made custom suit at a family meeting. Kate said something to the driver, and the luxury car quietly drove off. Trying not to show my agitation, I attempted a pleasant conversation. "I'm fine, thank you. But is there something you need? There's no way someone like Ben, a company president, would have business at such a small shop." If my in-laws came together to see me, it couldn't be good news. Ben glanced at Kate, who dramatically pulled a piece of paper from her bag. "We're here suddenly because our company decided to buy Lila's stationery shop." Kate thrust the paper at me. It looked like a contract for the sale of the stationery shop. Without really looking at it, I pushed the contract back to Kate. "I have no intention of selling the shop." Kate seemed slightly surprised at my firm stance. She hadn't expected resistance. Stories about husbands and children were better. I thought they would press me to divorce their son if I wasn't going to have children. Surely my husband must have told them about our recent fights. But my assumption was way off. I may not be attached to my husband or marriage anymore, but I can't give up the shop I inherited from my father. Kate and I stared at each other for a while, but neither of us was willing to back down. Kate opened her mouth again as if to gauge my reaction, but I brushed her off with a single sentence. Ben's mouth twitched at my firm response.
"It's not a bad deal, you know. You get rid of this barely break-even old shop and make some money. I get to further my company's business plan. It's a win-win, wouldn't you say?"
Ben confidently proposed the deal to me. I remembered a conversation I had a few days ago with fellow members of the local Merchants Association. Apparently, a company with no ties to the local community has been approaching shops in our area, offering to buy them out. This company, it seems, plans to buy the whole shopping district for a massive redevelopment project. Some financially struggling shops have been happy with the money offered and sold out. Members were worried that the disappearance of our shopping district was only a matter of time. Could this company be the one Ben runs? I looked at Ben with suspicion. "Just out of curiosity, how much would I get if I agreed to sell?" My in-laws smiled, thinking I was entering negotiations. I invited them inside the shop, which was still closed, thinking it would be a long discussion. We went back to the room where my father used it as a break room, and I sat down on the sofa. Ben drank the coffee. I ordered, and then fixed his gaze on me.
"We'll buy this shop for $6,000.
$6,000? I wondered if I had misheard, but Ben's expression showed he was serious. Kate, perhaps to clarify my doubts, presented the contract again. It indeed stated $6,000.
That's 3 months of your revenue. Considering you're Jim's wife, we can go up to $7,000.
I felt dizzy. I took a sip of my coffee and shook my head.
If there are any debts on the shop, we'll cover those too,
Kate added as if to seal the deal. It was simply too cheap. That was my impression. They probably based their offer on the $2,000 monthly revenue Ben must have heard through my husband. There was no way I could sell my father's shop, filled with memories and love from our customers, for such a trivial amount. No amount of money will make me sell the shop. It's precious to me, I declared, looking straight at my in-laws. Kate sighed.
Why are you so attached to a shop with no sales? You'd be better off cutting it loose,
she said coolly, like a true business person. Ben added,
It would be better for the community to do something more profitable.
Say, what they said wasn't wrong from a business standpoint. Without sales, a business cannot survive. But they were missing the point. I put down my coffee cup and faced them. You should have checked your information more thoroughly. I opened my laptop and showed them the accounting screen. Their surprise was evident as they looked at the numbers. Our annual revenue is $2 million. Trying to buy it for a mere $6,000 is absurd. Just then, the shop door opened. I thought it was a customer and started to stand up, but it was my husband. He seemed to have come to check on his parents' unsuccessful negotiations. His first words were,
Are you still at it?
Ben snapped at him.
Lila, did you lie to me?
My husband just arrived and already being yelled at looked lost. He glanced at Kate for help. Kate avoided his pitiful gaze and glared at me.
What do you mean? There's no way this old shop is making $2 million.
Kate's outburst seemed to finally make my husband understand the situation. Although blamed by Ben, my husband was a victim too in his own way. It all started because I gave my husband a false figure for the store's revenue. The one fault my husband might have with Ben was that he took the information I gave him at face value without verifying it. But at the same time, my in-laws made the same mistake. All three of them believed the old stationery shop's revenue was only $2,000. I urged my husband to sit down while I showed the more detailed pages of the ledger to my in-laws. You know there are several elementary schools nearby, right? My in-laws and husband nodded as they looked at each other. Elementary students all buy notebooks, pencils, erasers, etc. Our store has a partnership with the schools for these supplies. Since I took over the shop, we've also been selling online. Even in this old shop, we have customers and revenue. My in-laws stared at the ledger, disbelieving. I closed my laptop and looked at my flustered in-laws and husband. If you're talking about buying the shop for 3 months of revenue, it would have to be at least $500,000. Ben was stunned by my words. As a company president, even he couldn't afford to pay $500,000 for such an old stationery shop. He had thought $6,000 was a fair value for the shop. The negotiation was over before it began. I had no intention of selling the shop, and my in-laws didn't have the will to buy it at such a high price. A heavy silence enveloped them. Only my husband looked at me with a strong will.
Why didn't you tell me, Lila? If I knew you were making that much...
You thought of me as just a nagging middle-aged woman, didn't you? I interrupted him. He stumbled over his words.
That was wrong of me. I won't talk about children anymore. Just go at your pace, Lila.
He looked up at me pleadingly, his eyes cunning, trying to align himself with the stronger side to survive. I took a thin piece of paper from my father's treasured filing cabinet and handed it to my husband. You look down on me, even tried to take my precious shop. I can't live with someone like that anymore, and I certainly don't want to have your child. My husband looked dumbfounded at the divorce papers I had already filled out. My in-laws reacted first, rushing to apologize to me.
We'll cancel the redevelopment project. We won't pressure Lila anymore. Just don't divorce, please. Jim is going to be the next president. A divorce would be..."
Urged by Ben, my husband also apologized. They only ever thought about themselves. I was done with my in-laws and husband. Kate's tearful pleas fell on deaf ears. I stood up, looking down at the three of them, apologizing. "It's time to open the shop. So, please leave." Later, with the help of a lawyer and ignoring my clinging husband and in-laws, I successfully finalized the divorce. I moved out of the house under my husband's name and into the stationery shop, which was also my childhood home. I hadn't cleaned much of the living area since my father's passing, but thankfully the local community helped me with cleaning and recycling appliances, and I easily started my new life. As I had known these people since I was a child, I didn't feel too lonely in my parents' house, now that they were gone. After failing to negotiate the sale of my shop, my in-laws' company faced a backlash for trying to cheaply buy out shops in the shopping district, leading to a stock price crash. They had to significantly downsize the company to stay afloat, and the executive salaries, including my in-laws and husbands, were mostly cut, forcing them to sell their family home. I sometimes saw figures resembling my in-laws or husband lingering near my shop, but they stopped appearing after the divorce was finalized. They weren't bold enough to ask me for money even after the divorce. In contrast to my in-laws' company, my stationery shop flourished even more. Using my experience working at a stationery manufacturer, I increased profits and bought the vacant lot next door to expand the shop. For now, I'm not interested in marriage or children and have no desire to date. The owner of the grocery store keeps trying to set me up with a son, but I'll likely spend my days happily busy with my work for a while.